12 Forgotten Medieval Cures that Heal Faster Than Modern Medicine. A 9th century Anglo-Saxon medical text called Bald's Leech Book contains a recipe for an eye salve made from garlic, wine, and ox bile. Sounds disgusting, right? In 2015, researchers at the University of Nottingham recreated this 1,000-year-old remedy to see if it actually did anything. It killed antibiotic-resistant MRSA bacteria. Not just slowed it down, killed it. We're talking about a superbug that hospitalizes 80,000 Americans every year and kills around 11,000. Modern antibiotics struggle with this thing. A recipe written before England had a unified kingdom just walked in and solved the problem. That's not an isolated case. Medieval medicine gets a bad reputation. We picture barber surgeons with filthy tools, bloodletting for everything, and treatments based on balancing your humors. And yeah, some of that happened. But buried in those old medical texts, monastery gardens, and village healing traditions were remedies that actually worked. Not placebo effect worked. Not made you feel better psychologically worked. Actually measurably, scientifically worked. The problem is, we threw them out. When modern medicine developed in the 19th and 20th centuries, we assumed everything that came before was superstition. We had antibiotics now, synthetic drugs, scientific methods. Why would we need some peasant's poultice made from weeds? Turns out, those peasants knew a few things. Some medieval cures heal wounds faster than modern antibiotics. Others stop bleeding better than anything in your first aid kit. A few fight infections that modern medicine can barely touch. And they've been sitting in old manuscripts and folk traditions this whole time, mostly ignored, while we wondered why our antibiotic resistance crisis keeps getting worse. So let's talk about 12 medieval cures that modern science has validated, reluctantly admitted work, or is just now rediscovering. These aren't historical curiosities. They're practical remedies with centuries of field testing and, increasingly, peer-reviewed studies backing them up. The modern medicine problem. Before we dive into the cures, we need to talk about why this matters. Modern medicine is incredible. Vaccines, antibiotics, surgery, imaging technology, these things save millions of lives. Nobody's arguing we should go back to drilling holes in skulls to release evil spirits. But modern medicine has a few problems medieval healers never faced. First, antibiotic resistance. We've used antibiotics so aggressively in hospitals, in livestock, in everything, that bacteria are evolving faster than we can develop new drugs. The CDC estimates that antibiotic-resistant infections cause 2.8 million illnesses and 35,000 deaths in the US every year. That number's rising. Some scientists think we're heading toward a post-antibiotic world where common infections become deadly again. Medieval healers couldn't create that problem. They didn't have antibiotics to overuse. Second, side effects. Modern drugs are powerful, which means they often come with a list of potential complications longer than the actual benefits. Oh, take a standard antibiotic course, and you're looking at potential digestive issues, yeast infections, drug interactions, and sometimes allergic reactions. NSAIDs like ibuprofen can cause stomach bleeding, liver damage, and cardiovascular problems if used long-term. Opioid painkillers, well, we know how that story goes. Medieval remedies weren't always gentle, but many of them had fewer systemic side effects because they targeted problems locally or used compounds that the body handles more naturally. Third, cost and accessibility. A single dose of some modern antibiotics can cost hundreds of dollars. Emergency medical care can bankrupt you. Medieval cures? Most grew in fields, gardens, or forests. A peasant could treat a wound with plantain leaves or yarrow without needing insurance approval. And fourth, there's the loss of knowledge. When we abandon traditional medicine entirely, we lost centuries of empirical observation. Medieval healers didn't have randomized controlled trials, but they had something else: generations of trial and error. If a remedy killed people, it stopped being used. If it worked, it got passed down. The ones that survived often survived for good reason. So when you see a medieval cure that actually works, you're looking at something that passed a very different kind of test. Not a lab test, a survival test. 1. Honey for wounds. Let's start with something that sounds too simple to work. Medieval healers used honey on everything: open wounds, burns, ulcers, infections. Mix it with other ingredients or slap it on straight. Monastery infirmaries kept stores of honey specifically for medical use. Ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Roman medical texts all recommend it. Medieval Europeans continued the practice for over 1,000 years. Modern medicine looked at this and said, "Yeah, that's just folk tradition. Bacteria love sugar. This makes no sense." Then researchers actually tested it. Turns out honey is one of the most effective wound dressings ever discovered. Medical-grade honey, particularly Manuka honey from New Zealand, outperforms many modern antibiotics against wound infections. It works through several mechanisms that scientists are still mapping out. First, honey is hygroscopic. It pulls moisture out of bacterial cells, essentially dehydrating them to death. Second, when honey contacts wound fluid, it produces hydrogen peroxide, a natural antiseptic. Third, honey creates an acidic environment that bacteria struggle to survive in. Fourth, it contains antimicrobial compounds that we're still identifying. And fifth, it actually helps wounds heal faster by promoting tissue growth and reducing inflammation. Studies show honey dressings reduce healing time for burns, surgical wounds, and diabetic ulcers. A 2015 review in the Cochrane database found that honey heals partial thickness, burns about 4 to 5 days faster than conventional dressings. For diabetic foot ulcers, honey dressings showed better results than standard care in multiple trials. And here's the kicker: honey works on antibiotic-resistant bacteria, MRSA, VRE, antibiotic-resistant Pseudomonas. Honey kills them all. Some hospitals now stock medical-grade honey for wound care, particularly for infections that aren't responding to antibiotics. Medieval healers didn't know about hydrogen peroxide or pH levels. They just knew it worked. They kept using it because patients with honey-treated wounds survived infections and healed faster than patients without it. Empirical observation over centuries led them to the same conclusion that modern science reached with controlled trials: honey is medicine. The difference is, we forgot this for about a century while we were busy developing antibiotics. Now we're rediscovering it because our antibiotics are failing. 2. Maggot therapy. This one sounds worse than honey, but stay with me. Medieval and early modern surgeons noticed something odd on battlefields. Soldiers whose wounds got infested with maggots often healed better than soldiers with clean wounds. The maggots seemed to clean out dead tissue and infection. So some surgeons started deliberately introducing maggots to wounds. This practice continued into the early 20th century. During World War I, an American surgeon named William Baer observed that soldiers with maggot-infested wounds had much lower rates of gangrene and infection. He started using maggot therapy intentionally and published his results in 1931. Then antibiotics arrived, and everyone forgot about maggots. Who needs fly larvae when you've got penicillin? Fast forward to the 1990s. Antibiotic resistance is rising. Chronic wounds aren't healing. Some wounds develop biofilms, bacterial colonies protected by a slimy coating that antibiotics can't penetrate. Doctors are amputating limbs because infections won't respond to treatment. So researchers looked back at maggot therapy. The FDA approved medical maggots in 2004. They're grown in sterile conditions, applied to wounds, and left to do their work. And they're incredibly effective. Maggots do three things. First, they eat dead tissue while leaving healthy tissue alone. They're more precise than surgical debridement. Second, they secrete antimicrobial compounds that kill bacteria, including antibiotic-resistant strains. Third, they stimulate healing by promoting tissue growth and reducing inflammation. A 2009 study in the British Medical Journal compared maggot therapy to conventional treatment for leg ulcers. Maggots debrided wounds faster and more completely. Patients reported less pain. Healing rates were comparable to or better than standard care. Another study found that maggot therapy reduced bacterial load in chronic wounds by 80 to 90% within 48 hours. For diabetic foot ulcers, which often lead to amputation, maggot therapy has prevented thousands of amputations by clearing infections that antibiotics couldn't touch. Hospitals keep medical maggots on hand now. You can get them prescribed. Medieval surgeons didn't know about biofilms or antimicrobial secretions. They just noticed that maggots cleaned wounds and saved limbs. They trusted their observations over their disgust. We thought we were too sophisticated for that. Now we're putting maggots back on wounds because nothing else works as well. 3. Willow bark. Everyone knows aspirin. It's one of the most common drugs in the world. Headache, aspirin, fever, aspirin, heart attack risk, daily aspirin. Americans consume about 29 billion aspirin tablets every year. What most people don't know is that aspirin came from a medieval cure. Willow bark has been used for pain and fever since ancient times. The Sumerians mentioned it. Hippocrates recommended it. Medieval European healers used willow bark tea for headaches, fevers, and joint pain. It was standard practice for over 1,000 years. In 1763, a British clergyman named Edward Stone tested willow bark systematically and reported that it reduced fever. In 1828, a German chemist isolated the active compound, salicin. In 1897, biochemist Felix Hoffmann synthesized a modified version, acetyl salicylic acid, and called it aspirin. So aspirin isn't really a modern invention. It's a medieval remedy that got chemically refined. The original willow bark works through the same mechanism. Salicin converts to salicylic acid in the body, which reduces inflammation, pain, and fever. Medieval healers didn't know the chemistry, but they knew the effect. Chew some willow bark or drink it as tea, and your headache goes away. The refined version, aspirin, works faster and more predictably because the dose is standardized. But willow bark tea has some advantages. It's gentler on the stomach because it contains compounds that protect the stomach lining, compounds that were removed during the refinement process. Some people who can't tolerate aspirin can use willow bark without problems. Studies confirm willow bark's effectiveness for pain relief. A 2000 study in the American Journal of Medicine found that willow bark extract was as effective as conventional pain medication for lower back pain with fewer side effects. A 2001 study showed similar results for osteoarthritis. Medieval healers figured out one of the most important drugs in modern medicine through observation and experimentation. They didn't have the chemistry, but they had the cure. We just put it in a pill and slapped a brand name on it. 4. Garlic. Remember that Anglo-Saxon eye salve from the beginning? The one that killed MRSA? Garlic was one of the main ingredients. Garlic shows up in medieval medicine constantly. Crushed garlic for infections, garlic poultices for wounds, garlic for digestive issues, garlic for respiratory problems. If something was wrong, medieval healers probably tried garlic at some point. This wasn't superstition. Garlic contains allicin, a compound with powerful antimicrobial properties. When you crush or chew garlic, an enzyme converts allicin into allicin. Allicin kills bacteria, fungi, into viruses, and parasites. It works against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It disrupts biofilms. It's basically a broad-spectrum antimicrobial that bacteria haven't figured out how to resist. modern studies confirm what medieval healers knew. A 2014 study found that aged garlic extract inhibited the growth of drug-resistant bacteria, including MRSA and multi-drug-resistant Acinetobacter. A 2016 review in the journal Avicenna Journal of Phytomedicine concluded that garlic has potent antimicrobial activity against bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites. Garlic also boosts immune function. A 2012 study in clinical nutrition found that aged garlic extract enhanced immune cell function and reduced the severity of colds and flu. A 2016 study showed that garlic supplementation reduced the number of sick days by 61% compared to placebo. For cardiovascular health, garlic lowers blood pressure, reduces cholesterol, and prevents arterial plaque formation. A 2013 meta-analysis in phytomedicine found that garlic supplementation significantly reduced both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Another meta-analysis found that garlic reduced total cholesterol by 10 to 15%. Medieval healers didn't know about allicin or cholesterol. They knew garlic fought infections and kept people healthy. They used it because it worked. We rediscovered its antimicrobial properties in the 20th century and are now using it to fight antibiotic-resistant infections. The medieval approach was simpler. Just eat garlic. Crush it, mix it with honey or wine, apply it to wounds, or consume it raw. No prescription needed. Leeches. Leeches are the most notorious medieval medical practice. Bloodletting with leeches became shorthand for everything barbaric and wrong about pre-modern medicine. The stereotype is medieval doctors applying leeches for every illness because they thought it balanced the humors. That stereotype has some truth. Medieval physicians did overuse bloodletting for conditions where it did nothing, but they also used leeches for specific conditions where they actually worked, and modern medicine has brought them back for those exact same conditions. The FDA approved medicinal leeches in 2004. Hospitals use them regularly now. Leeches are used in reconstructive surgery and microsurgery, particularly for reattaching severed fingers, ears, and other body parts. After reattachment, blood flows into the tissue but can't flow back out because the tiny veins are damaged. Blood pools, pressure builds, and the tissue dies from lack of circulation. Leeches solve this problem. They attach to the tissue and drain excess blood, reducing pressure until the veins heal enough to function. Leech saliva contains anticoagulants that keep blood flowing, anesthetics that prevent pain, and vasodilators that improve circulation. This combination is so effective that nothing synthetic works as well. A 2012 study in the Journal of Reconstructive Microsurgery found that leech therapy improved the salvage rate for congested tissue flaps from 60% to 70 to 80%. Without leeches, many reattached body parts would fail. Leeches are also used for treating hematomas and blood clots in certain locations. They're being studied for osteoarthritis, where leech saliva's anti-inflammatory compounds might reduce joint pain and swelling. Medieval healers used leeches for swelling, inflammation, and circulatory problems. They didn't understand the biochemistry, but they noticed that leeches reduced swelling and promoted healing in specific situations. When they used leeches for those specific conditions, not for balancing humors or treating fevers, they were actually practicing effective medicine. We mocked them for a century. Now we're ordering medical leeches from suppliers and charging patients thousands of dollars for the same treatment. 6. Yarrow. Walk through any European meadow and you'll find yarrow growing wild. Small white or pink flowers, feathery leaves grows everywhere. Medieval soldiers carried yarrow into battle. It has a nickname, soldier's woundwort. Why? Because yarrow stops bleeding fast. Medieval healers used yarrow for wounds, both fresh and infected. Crush the leaves, apply them to a bleeding wound, and the bleeding slows or stops. Make a tea from yarrow and drink it for internal bleeding or heavy menstrual flow. Use yarrow poultices on infected wounds to fight bacteria. This wasn't placebo effect. Yarrow contains several compounds that promote blood clotting and fight infection. Achelene, named after Achilles, who allegedly used yarrow on his soldiers' wounds, is a hemostatic alkaloid. It promotes coagulation and reduces bleeding time. Yarrow also contains anti-inflammatory compounds, antimicrobial terpenoids, and flavonoids that promote wound healing. A 2013 study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that yarrow extracts significantly reduced bleeding time and promoted clot formation in laboratory tests. A 2008 study showed that yarrow essential oil had strong antimicrobial activity against common wound bacteria. For wound healing, a 2015 study demonstrated that yarrow extract accelerated the healing of surgical wounds in rats, with faster tissue regeneration and reduced inflammation compared to controls. Medieval soldiers didn't have gauze or clotting agents, they had yarrow, and it worked well enough that they specifically sought it out before battles. The knowledge was so widespread that yarrow got common names related to wounds in multiple languages. Soldier's woundwort in English, herbe au charpentier, carpenter's herb, in French, and plumagillo, little feather, in Spanish. Modern field medics carry quick clot and hemostatic gauze. Medieval soldiers carried dried yarrow. Both work through promoting coagulation, just with different chemical mechanisms. You can still find yarrow growing wild. It's still effective for minor bleeding. And now we have studies proving what medieval soldiers knew from experience. 7. Plantain. Not the banana-looking fruit. Plantago major, the weed with broad leaves that grows in lawns, paths, and waste areas across Europe and North America. If you've got grass, you've probably got plantain. Medieval healers called it the mother of herbs. They used plantain leaves for everything: wounds, burns, insect bites, skin infections, respiratory problems. Fresh leaves were crushed and applied directly to injuries. Dried leaves were made into teas. Plantain was so valued that European colonists deliberately brought it to North America. Native Americans called it white man's footprint because it grew everywhere Europeans settled. Plantain works. The leaves contain allantoin, a compound that promotes cell regeneration and wound healing. They also contain antimicrobial compounds, anti-inflammatory agents, and mucilage that soothes damaged tissue. When you crush fresh plantain leaves and apply them to a wound, you get a natural poultice that fights infection, reduces inflammation, and speeds healing. A 2002 study published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology found that plantain extract significantly accelerated wound healing in rats. A 2012 study in the International Journal of Inflammation showed that plantain extract reduced inflammation as effectively as some anti-inflammatory drugs. Multiple studies have confirmed plantain's antimicrobial activity against common wound bacteria. For burns, plantain is remarkably effective. The mucilage cools and protects the burn, while the allantoin promotes healing. Medieval burn treatments often involved crushed plantain mixed with honey, combining two effective remedies. Insect bites and stings respond quickly to plantain. Crush a fresh leaf, rub it on the bite, and the itching and swelling reduce within minutes. This works through a combination of anti-inflammatory compounds and the physical action of the mucilage, drawing out irritants. Medieval peasants who couldn't afford physician care used plantain for everyday injuries. But they knew it worked because they'd used it their whole lives, learned from parents who'd used it their whole lives. The knowledge went back generations. We paved over plantain, called it a weed, and sprayed it with herbicides. Now we're putting allantoin into expensive skin creams and wound healing ointments. Same compound, we just extracted it, purified it, and charged $20 for a tiny tube. 8. Elderberry. Every medieval village had an elder tree. The flowers made tea and cordial. The berries made syrup, wine, and medicine. elder was considered protective, healing, almost magical in its importance. The magical reputation came from real effects. Elderberry syrup was the standard medieval treatment for colds, flu, respiratory infections, and fevers. Take elderberry at the first sign of illness, and you'd recover faster. Medieval healers didn't know about viruses or immune systems. They knew elderberry worked. Modern research has validated this so thoroughly that elderberry supplements are now mainstream. You can buy elderberry syrup at any pharmacy. Elderberries contain high levels of anthocyanins, flavonoids, with potent antiviral and immune-boosting properties. Studies show that elderberry extract inhibits viral replication for influenza viruses, including multiple strains. A 2004 study in the Journal of International Medical Research found that elderberry extract reduced flu duration by an average of 4 days. A 2016 study showed that airline passengers taking elderberry supplements had shorter and less severe colds than those taking placebo. A 2019 study in the Journal of Functional Foods found that elderberry compounds block viral entry into cells and stop viral replication at multiple stages. The effect was strong enough that researchers concluded elderberry could be developed as a flu treatment. For immune function, elderberry increases cytokine production, enhances immune cell activity, and provides powerful antioxidant support. It's one of the most evidence-backed herbal remedies for respiratory infections. Medieval preparation methods were simple. Simmer berries with honey or sugar to make a syrup. Take a spoonful at the first sign of illness, then continue several times daily until symptoms resolve. This is exactly what the modern studies tested, just with standardized extracts. The medieval cure for flu is now sold in stores with scientific studies backing it up. We just renamed it a supplement instead of calling it medicine. 9. Comfrey. Comfrey has a medieval nickname, knitbone. That tells you what it was used for. Medieval bone setters and healers used comfrey poultices on broken bones, sprains, and fractures. They also used it on wounds, bruises, and torn tissue. The plant has broad, fuzzy leaves and grows in damp areas across Europe. If you had a broken leg, you'd get comfrey applied to the area around the break. This actually worked. Comfrey contains allantoin in higher concentrations than almost any other plant. Allantoin promotes cell proliferation. It makes cells divide and regenerate faster. For bone healing, this means faster callus formation. For soft tissue, it means faster repair of damaged muscle, tendon, and ligament tissue. A 2013 study in phytotherapy research found that comfrey cream significantly reduced pain and improved mobility in patients with ankle sprains. A 2004 study showed that comfrey ointment was as effective as diclofenac gel, a common NSAID, for treating acute ankle sprains, with patients recovering just as quickly. For bruises and muscle pain, multiple studies have confirmed comfrey's effectiveness. A 2012 clinical trial found that comfrey cream reduced back pain more effectively than placebo, with results comparable to conventional pain medications. The mechanism is straightforward. Allantoin penetrates the skin and promotes tissue regeneration. Anti-inflammatory compounds reduce swelling and pain. The combination speeds healing for bone fractures, sprains, bruises, and muscle injuries. Medieval bone setters didn't have X-rays or medical degrees. They set bones by feel and used comfrey to promote healing. Recovery rates were good enough that bone setting became a recognized profession, with knowledge passed down through families. Modern orthopedic medicine has sophisticated surgical techniques and internal fixation, but for simple fractures and soft tissue injuries, comfrey still works. You can buy comfrey cream over the counter now, usually marketed for bruises and muscle pain. Same plant, same effect. We just stopped calling it knitbone. 10. Chamomile. Chamomile tea is everywhere now. People drink it to relax, to sleep, to calm down. Most think of it as a pleasant beverage, maybe a mild sleep aid. Medieval healers used chamomile for serious digestive problems, infections, and inflammation. Chamomile wasn't just a relaxing tea, it was medicine. And they were right. Chamomile contains multiple bioactive compounds: apigenin, bisabolol, chamazoline, and others. These compounds have anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic, antimicrobial, and anxiolytic properties. Chamomile works on multiple body systems simultaneously. For digestive issues, chamomile is remarkably effective. A 2015 meta-analysis in Electronic Physician concluded that chamomile significantly reduces symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, including abdominal pain, bloating, and bowel movement irregularity. A 2012 study showed that chamomile extract was as effective as mebeverine, a common IBS medication, for reducing intestinal cramping. For anxiety and sleep, apigenin binds to the same brain receptors as benzodiazepines like Xanax, but with much milder effects and no addiction risk. A 2016 study in phytomedicine found that long-term chamomile use significantly reduced moderate to severe anxiety disorder symptoms. Multiple studies confirm chamomile's effectiveness for improving sleep quality. For wound healing and skin inflammation, topical chamomile preparations work as well or better than some conventional treatments. A 2010 study found that chamomile extract promoted faster wound healing in rats. Studies on eczema, diaper rash, and inflammatory skin conditions consistently show chamomile's effectiveness. Medieval healers gave chamomile tea to patients with stomach cramps, anxiety, insomnia, and infected wounds. They made chamomile poultices for skin problems. They used it constantly because it worked for so many conditions. Yeah, we kept the tea but forgot it was medicine. Now studies are validating what medieval healers knew. Chamomile is an effective anti-inflammatory, anxiolytic, and digestive remedy. We just have to relearn that it's not just a pleasant beverage. 11. Vinegar. Medieval healers used vinegar for everything: cleaning wounds, preventing infection, preserving food, treating skin conditions. Vinegar-soaked cloths were used during plague outbreaks, though we now know that didn't help with plague. But for bacterial infections and wound care, vinegar actually worked. The Four Thieves vinegar legend claims that grave robbers during plague outbreaks protected themselves by covering their faces with vinegar-soaked cloths. The plague part is myth. Vinegar doesn't stop plague bacteria, but the antibacterial properties are real. Acetic acid, vinegar's main component, kills bacteria by disrupting cell membranes and denaturing proteins. At concentrations of 2 to 5%, vinegar is effective against many common bacteria, including some antibiotic-resistant strains. A 2014 study in MBIO found that acetic acid killed Mycobacterium tuberculosis, including drug-resistant strains. The researchers suggested that vinegar could be explored as a disinfectant for equipment in resource-poor settings. A 2018 study showed that diluted acetic acid was effective against antibiotic-resistant wound bacteria. For wound care, vinegar irrigation has been studied for chronic wounds and infections. Some studies show positive results, particularly for wounds infected with Pseudomonas or other resistant bacteria. The acetic acid disrupts biofilms that protect bacteria from antibiotics. Vinegar is also effective for skin conditions like fungal infections. A 2018 study found that vinegar baths improved symptoms in children with atopic dermatitis. For athlete's foot and other fungal issues, diluted vinegar soaks have shown effectiveness in multiple studies. Medieval healers didn't understand pH or bacterial cell membranes. They knew vinegar cleaned wounds and prevented infection. They used it because patients with vinegar-cleaned wounds healed better than patients without it. We have fancy antiseptics now. But for some resistant infections, we're coming back to acetic acid irrigation because antibiotics aren't working. Medieval healers already knew this trick. We just forgot it for a while. 12. Copper vessels. Here's one that barely looks like medicine. Medieval people stored water in copper vessels. They made copper cups, jugs, and storage containers. This wasn't just about aesthetics or wealth display. Copper was believed to keep water clean. It actually does. Copper has oligodynamic properties. It kills bacteria, viruses, and fungi on contact. When water sits in a copper vessel, trace amounts of copper ions dissolve into the water. These ions disrupt bacterial cell membranes and interfere with cellular processes. The result is that water stored in copper vessels stays cleaner than water stored in other materials. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Health, Population, and Nutrition found that storing water in copper pots for 16 hours reduced bacterial contamination to undetectable levels. The researchers tested highly contaminated water and found that copper storage eliminated E. coli, salmonella, and other dangerous bacteria. A 2011 study in Applied and Environmental Microbiology showed that copper surfaces killed MRSA bacteria within hours. Hospitals are now installing copper fixtures and surfaces to reduce hospital-acquired infections. For water purification, copper vessels work best when water is stored for several hours. The effectiveness increases with storage time. Medieval people would fill copper jugs in the morning and drink from them throughout the day, allowing the copper to work. This knowledge was so widespread that copper vessels were valued for health reasons, not just economic ones. Ayurvedic medicine in India recommends drinking water stored in copper vessels for health benefits. Medieval European, Middle Eastern, and Asian cultures all used copper for water storage. We switched to glass and plastic because they're cheaper and don't require polishing. But in areas without reliable water purification, copper vessels are being reconsidered as a low-tech, sustainable solution to waterborne disease. Medieval people kept their water in copper because it kept them healthier. We thought that was superstition. It wasn't. The pattern. Notice the pattern here? Medieval healers observed effects. They didn't know the biochemistry. They didn't have microscopes or clinical trials, but they knew what worked because they'd used it for generations. If a remedy killed people, it stopped being used. If it healed people, it spread. Modern science looked at these remedies and dismissed them without testing because they came from unscientific sources. Then antibiotic resistance forced us to look harder. And when we actually tested these medieval cures, we found that many of them work exactly as described. The scientific method validated empirical observation. But empirical observation came first. Medieval healers were doing science, just without the formal structure. They tested, observed, and recorded. They kept what worked and discarded what didn't. The successful remedies survived because they passed the ultimate test. They healed people. We arrogantly assumed we knew better. Now we're rediscovering that we don't always know better. Sometimes the old ways worked because they were good medicine, not because people were ignorant. Conclusion: 12 medieval cures that modern medicine has validated, reluctantly or otherwise. Honey for wounds, maggots for chronic infections, willow bark for pain, garlic for resistant bacteria, leeches for microsurgery, yarrow for bleeding, plantain for everyday injuries, elderberry for flu, comfrey for fractures, chamomile for anxiety and digestion, vinegar for disinfection, copper for water purification. These aren't all the medieval cures that work. There are dozens more. Mint for digestion, sage for sore throats, lavender for burns, thyme for respiratory infections, nettle for inflammation. The list goes on. What connects them is that medieval healers figured them out through observation and experience. They didn't have the privilege of dismissing traditional knowledge because they didn't have textbooks to replace it with. They had to learn what worked through trial and error over centuries. We had textbooks. We had modern medicine. We assumed we didn't need the old knowledge anymore. And for many conditions, we don't. Modern surgery, vaccines, and antibiotics have saved millions of lives that medieval medicine couldn't have saved. But we threw out too much. We dismissed everything that came before as superstition. And now we're facing problems: antibiotic resistance, chronic wounds that won't heal, infections we can't treat, that are forcing us to look backward. Turns out, medieval healers knew a few things. Their remedies weren't perfect, but they weren't nonsense either. They were practical solutions developed over centuries of empirical testing. And many of them still work, sometimes better than what we replaced them with. The smartest approach isn't choosing between medieval and modern medicine. It's taking the best from both. Use antibiotics when you need them. But know that honey might work when antibiotics fail. Get surgery for serious fractures. But know that comfrey might speed your recovery. Trust modern medicine. But don't dismiss traditional knowledge just because it's old. Medieval healers didn't have everything figured out. Neither do we. The difference is, they knew they didn't have all the answers. They stayed curious. They kept testing. They learned from what worked. Maybe that's the real cure we need to rediscover, not just the remedies. The humility to learn from the past, instead of assuming we've surpassed it. If you found these forgotten cures valuable, hit the like button and subscribe to Medieval Over Modern for more discoveries about what we lost when we stopped looking backward. Drop a comment and let me know which medieval cure surprised you most, or if you've tried any of these remedies yourself. Share this with anyone interested in natural medicine, medical history, or just understanding why sometimes the old ways worked better than what replaced them. And if you want to dive deeper into any of these cures, check out the sources linked in the description. Stay curious, stay healthy, and remember that progress isn't always forward.